We continue now at the top of Daf Nunam and Beis in Meseches Kiddushin. This is Kiddushin Daf 50b. On the previous Amud, the Mishnah said, let's say a person is Mekadesh, a woman with less than a Shava Pruta, even though he sends gifts afterward to the woman, Eina Mekudeshes, it's still not a good Kiddushin. And Rashi says, Eina Mekudeshes, V'lo Amrinan, we don't say, Yodeya Hayashem Kiddush of Kiddushin, that he knew all along it's not a Kiddushin. V'gamar V'shalach Sivlonos L'Shem Kiddushin, and the gifts he was sending was actually part of the Kiddushin. El Amrinan Machmas Kiddushin Harishonim Shalach. Rather we say, he sent that assuming that the first Kiddushin was a Kiddushin, as the Mishnah says, Shemachmas Kiddushin Harishonim Shalach. He sent that because of the original Kiddushin. He didn't send that to complete the Kiddushin or to actually affect the Kiddushin, and that's why since he was Mekadesh or with less than a Shava Pruta, it is not considered to be a good Kiddushin. And the Mishnah says, V'chein Katan Shekidesh, the same would be true if he was Mekadesh her while he was a minor. Rashi says, V'chein Katan Shekidesh V'shilach Sivlonos Mishahigda. Let's say he sent the gifts after he became an adult. Again, we assume that he was assuming the Kiddushin was already good as a Katan. Of course, it was not, and therefore it's not a good Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Utzrichan, we need both cases in the Mishnah, meaning we need the case where we're talking about where it's a Shava Pruta to two women, was one case over there, and the other case if it was less than a Shava Pruta to one woman. Rashi says, Utzricha lemisni shtei nashim bepruta. The Mishnah has to teach us a case where he's Mekadesh two women with a Pruta. Ulemisni oachas bepachas mishava Pruta. It also has to teach us the case when he's Mekadesh one woman with less than a Shava Pruta. And then, of course, the last case as well, V'katan shekidesh. It also has to teach us a case by a minor who's Mekadesh, La'ashmin and Bekulo, and we're teaching the same thing in all three cases. The Sivulonos, the Basrachi, Lavla Kiddushin Inu, that the gifts that are given afterwards can't count towards Kiddushin. Why do we need all the cases? The Iashmin and Shava Pruta, because if we only had the case of Shava Pruta, Aidi de Kanafik Memona Mine Toy. So there we would say, since the money, actual money, meaning a Pruta's worth of value, is leaving him, so therefore maybe in that case he makes the mistake. Rashi says, Toy Visavar de Kiddushin Inu. In other words, he thinks when he gives a Pruta to two women, well, I gave a Pruta, so he thinks it's a good Kiddushin. He's not thinking that the gifts should count towards Kiddushin, and that's why it's not a good Kiddushin. But let's say you had a case where he gave one woman less than a Shava Pruta. So then I might say, of course he knows that there's no Kiddushin less than a Shava Pruta. When he's sending gifts, he's thinking that should be the Kiddushin. That's what you might think, and we're saying no. Even in that case, it's not a Kiddushin. And if we only had those two cases, mishum debein pruta lepachos mishava pruta lokim loinshi, because people don't really even know the difference between a pruta and less than a shava pruta. It's such a small difference in value, you can't ascertain it. Avol katan shekidish, but if you're talking about a minor who's mekadesh a woman hakol yod, and everybody knows shein kiddushay katan klum, that the kiddushin of a katan is nothing. Eimoki kameshader sivlonos adaita the kiddushay kameshader. So there you would say maybe when he's sending the gifts, he's doing it on the understanding that that's a kiddushin, and so that's why the Mishnah says, Kamash Malon, that's why the Mishnah comes to teach us that by Katan as well, it is not going to be a good Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Ravuna Amar Choshishin L'Sivlonos. Ravuna says we are concerned when it comes to Sivlonos, when it comes to gifts. V'chein Amar Rabba, and similarly Rabba says, Choshishin L'Sivlonos, we are concerned when it comes to gifts. And Rashi explains, Choshishin L'Sivlonos, Misha Shidech Be'isha. The case is, let's say somebody arranges to marry a woman, and then he goes ahead, they agree to get married, and he sends her sivlonos, he sends her some gifts with witnesses. We have a concern, maybe the gifts that he's sending her are actually kiddushin. And let's say she wants to get a kiddushin from somebody else, she would need a get from the first individual. In other words, when Rav Huna says choshishin l'sivlonos, it's a concern that those sivlonos that were sent before the kiddushin, maybe they actually are a kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba says, Umosvinan Ashmaitin, and we ask a question on this halachic ruling. Afal Pisha Shilach Sivlonos La'achar Mikan Eina Mekudeshes. It says in our Mishnah that even though he sends Sivlonos afterwards, so again, the case was, let's say the person is Mekadesh, the woman, with less than a Shava Pruta, so it said that's not a Kiddushin, and even though he sends Sivlonos after that, that's not going to be a good Kiddushin. And so you see from our Mishnah that there's no concern that the Sivlonos are a Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Amar le Abaye said back to him, Hasam over there, Kiddushin time, it's like the Mishnah gives the reason. Shemachmas Kiddushin Harishonim Shilach, that it's only because of the first Kiddushin that he actually sent it, meaning in that case, it's obvious that he thought what he gave at first, even though it was less than a Shava Pruta, he thought that what he gave was a Kiddushin, and therefore he's just sending these gifts assuming there already was a Kiddushin, and that's the only reason why the Sivlonos are not a Kiddushin. but it could be in a normal situation. The Sivlonos are being sent before any Kiddushin was sent. Maybe there is a concern that those Sivlonos are Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that say they have a different version. Amar Rabba says, Mina Aminallah. On the contrary, he's not asking a question from our Mishnah, he's bringing a proof from our Mishnah. Mina Aminallah, from where can I show that Choshen LaSivlonos, that we are concerned that Sivlonos might be a Kiddushin? Kidikatani Taima, because what reason is given in our Mishnah? It says, Shemachmas Kiddushin Harishonim Shilach, that he's only sending them because of the first Kiddushin, meaning the only reason we don't say that the Sivlonos are, the only reason that we don't say the Sivlonos are Kiddushin is because he's already sent a Kiddushin, and this is being sent after the Kiddushin. And so therefore, Hachahu Detay, over here, he's making a mistake, and he thinks there already was a Kiddushin, and that's why the Sivlonos are not Kiddushin. Habi'alma have a Kiddushin, but in general, it seems like Sivlonos would be a Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues in this version via Abaye, and Abaye responds to Rabbah that it's not a proof from the Mishnah, because lo mi boy kamar, the Mishnah means to say not only here but even over here. Lo mi boy bialma, we don't even need to say it in a regular case. To lo nochis l'toras kiddushin klal, where he hasn't gotten involved in kiddushin at all. So over there, certainly the Sivlonos will not be kiddushin. Elafilu hacha, but even over here in the Mishnah, the nochis l'toras kiddushin, where he's already started, it's clear that he's starting the process of kiddushin. Ema have a kiddushin, so I might think that the Sivlonos are a kiddushin. He gave less than a shava pruta at first, and now he's giving the Sivlonos. Maybe you would say it's clear that he's giving them for Kiddushin purposes, Kamash Malon, so that's what the Mishnah is teaching. The Mishnah is saying, no, we are not concerned, even in the case in our Mishnah, we're not concerned that the Sivlonos are Kiddushin. And Rashi says that Abaye responds, Aval hocha din nochis lahachi mitoch she'ola al libo v'nizkar she'en Kiddush of klum. In other words, in this case, the person recognized the fact, he realized that I had done Kiddushin, but that Kiddushin was nothing, v'shilach Sivlonos, and then he goes ahead and he sends gifts, Eimel Hashem Kiddushin. I might think that it is a Kiddushin. That's what our Mishnah is saying. I might think that's the case, and in our Mishnah, the Mishnah is saying that the Sivlonos do not count as a Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, My Hava Allah, what is the halacha in terms of Sivlonos? Are they considered Kiddushin or not? And the Gemara says, Amar Rapapa says, Bi'asr de Mekadshi v'hodim Masavli, if you're in an area where people first do Kiddushin and then they give gifts, so then Chayshinan, so then we are concerned, because if the person is sending something, he's probably sending it for Kiddushin purposes. That's always what comes first in this particular place. But Masavli v'hodim Mekadshi, but if you're in a place where they first give gifts and then they do Kiddushin, so then Lo Chayshinan, then there's no concern that the gifts are Kiddushin, because that's normal to first give gifts that are not Kiddushin, and then you give the Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Mekachi v'adim esavli pshita, if it's an area where they first do Kiddushin and then they give gifts, then isn't it obvious that we're concerned it's Kiddushin? Of course it's Kiddushin. That's what people generally do in this place. And the Gemara says, Lo, no, tzricha, it's necessary to teach this halacha, the ruba mekachi v'adim esavli, because the majority of people, they do Kiddushin first and then they give gifts. Umiyuta esavli v'adim mekachi, but then there's a minority of people, they give gifts first and then they do the Kiddushin. So ma'od detema nechosh l'miyuta, maybe what might you say that we should be concerned about the miyut, about the minority of people, that maybe this is not really a Kiddushin. Kamash Malon, that's what we're teaching over here. We're teaching that since the majority of people, they do the Kiddushin first, we assume that this in fact is a Kiddushin. And the Gemara continues, Boy minei Ravacha bar Rav Huna me Rava. Ravacha bar Rav Huna asks Rava the following question, Huchzik shtar ksuba b'shuk mahu. What if we have a woman and we see the shtar ksuba, she's holding the ksuba in the marketplace, everyone knows she has a ksuba, so what is the halacha? Do we consider that she's a married woman because she has the ksuba? Amar Lei said to him, V'chi mipnei shemachzik shtar ksuba b'shuk, nachzik bo ka'eshes is, just because we see that she's holding a shtar ksuba out in public, that means we should assume she's an eshes ish. And the Gemara says, My have Allah, what is the halacha in terms of this? If you have a case where a woman is holding a ksuba, does that show that she's married or not? And the Gemara answers, Amar Ravashi says, Ba'asr de mekadshi v'hadr kasvi ksuba, if you're in a place where they first do Kiddushin and then they write the ksuba, chayshin, and then we really are concerned. We're concerned she's an eshes ish, because that's the custom in this place. First they do Kiddushin, then they write the ksuba. The fact that she has the ksuba, that shows that she's married. But kasvi v'hadr mekadshi, but if you're in a place where they first write the ksuba and then they do Kiddushin, so lo chashin, and so then we're not concerned that she has Kiddushin, we're not concerned that she's a married woman. And the Gemara says, Mekachi v'hadr kasvi, if it's a place where they do Kiddushin and then they write the ksuba, pshita, so then it's obvious, of course she's a married woman. And the Gemara says it's not so obvious, lo no tzricha, it's necessary to lo shchiach safra. Let's say we're in a place place where a scribe is not common, it's not easy to find someone who can write a ksuba. Ma'u detema, what might you have said? Safar hu de isrami, that he happened to find a sofer, and he said it's hard to find the sofer, let's just do the ksuba right now. Maybe that's what happened, kamash malon. So that's what it's teaching us over here, that no, since the custom is to do kiddushin first and then to write the ksuba, so it is assumed that if she has the ksuba, she is mekudeshes. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, HaMekadesh Isha Uvita, if someone is Mekadesh, a woman and her daughter, or Isha V'achos Ka'achas, or somebody is Mekadesh, a woman and her sister, and he does this at the exact same time, meaning he's Mekadesh, the mother and daughter, or the two sisters at one moment, Einon Mikudashos, that is not a good Kiddushin. Umaisa B'chamesh Nashim, there was an incident with 5 women, Uvahen Shtei Achayos, among the 5 women were 2 sisters, V'liked Adam Echad Kalkala Shel Te'enim, and a person collected a basket of figs, V'shelahen Hoysa, it actually belonged to them, it was from their field. V'shel Shavias Haisa, was the Shemitah year, it was the Hefker, so he gathered it. V'yamar, and he said, Harei kulchem mekudashos li, you're all mekudashos to me, b'kalkala zu, with this basket of figs. V'kivla achas mehen al yedei kulan, and one of them accepted it on behalf of all of them, so the Kiddushin was happening at the exact same moment. V'yamru chachamim, and the chachamim said, Ein achayos mekudashos, the sisters, the Kiddushin for the sisters is not good, they are not considered mekudashos. And the Gemara says, Minohani Mili, from where do we know this? How do we know that if you do a Kiddushin at the exact same time to, let's say, 2 sisters, that it's not a good Kiddushin at all? Amar Rami Bar Chama says, the Amar Krotz, because the Pasuk says, Isha el achosa lo sikach litzror, it says you can't take a woman's sister. In other words, you can't take her and make her like a co-wife. And the HaTorah Amr, the Torah is saying, B'shash and Nasu Tzara Zulazu, at the moment that they become co-wives to one another, Lo Yehelo Lekuchim Afilu B'achas Mehem, that's not going to be considered a good taking, it's not going to be considered a good Kiddushin, even with one of them. And so the Pasuk itself is stating explicitly that if you try to do the Kiddushin with 2 sisters at one time, it will not be a good Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Amar le Rava said to him, Yihachi, if that's how you read the Pasuk, that the Pasuk is saying that if you do Kiddushin at the same time to 2 sisters, it's not a good Kiddushin. Hainu dichsiv v'nichersu hanefashos ha'osos mikerev hamam, is that the explanation of what's written, that they get kares in that case? There's not going to be kares in such a situation. A Kiddushin lo tafsi, but if there was no Kiddushin at all, kares mi mechayev, would there be kares? In other words, let's say by 2 sisters, kares would happen if he marries one sister, and then he goes ahead and has relations with the second sister, that would be a case of kares, but it's not going to be kares if he gives Kiddushin to both of them at the same time and the Kiddushin doesn't take effect. So Elam Rava, rather Rava says, Kra bazeh charzeh. The Pasuk is talking about when it's sequentially. Again, like we just said, there's Kiddushin with one sister, then he has an act of relations with the other sister. That's the case in the Pasuk, that's the case of kares. Umas Nisan, now our Mishnah says again, it's not a Kiddushin if it's done at the same time. Where does that come from? That's Kiddur Rabbah, that's like what Rabbah taught. The Yomar Rabbah, because Rabbah said, Kol she'eno bazeh charzeh, anytime it will not work sequentially if you have a Kiddushin that's not going to take effect, because again, you had, let's say he was Mekadesh one sister, so the second sister is not going to be a good Kiddushin. Afilu b'vasachas eino, so if it happens even at the same time, it's not going to be a good Kiddushin. And the Gemara says, Gufa, returning to what we just said above, Rabbah's statement, Amar Rabbah says, Kol she'eno bazeh charzeh, anytime it's not going to work sequentially, Afilu b'vasachas eino, it's not going to work at the same time. Eisvei Abaye asks the following question, and Rashi explains, Ela bazeh charzeh, rather the Pasuk is talking about when it's sequentially, Shebekidushin harishon hi ishto, in other words, the first Kiddushin, that became his wife. The Kamer ein Kiddushin tovsin bachos, and then it's saying the Kiddushin is not going to work on the sister, v'im ba'aleha onish kares, and if he has relations with the sister, there's going to be a punishment of kares. Umas nisan, in our Mishnah again, it follows Rabbah, ki hayunami b'vasachas mehaikra nafki. Rashi understands, that's also learned from the same Pasuk. The fact that it's not going to be a good Kiddushin at the same time is learned from this same pasuk as well. Uchid Rabban, it follows Rabbah usvara bialmo. It's just a svara. It's logical to say this, meaning kol she'enu bazeh charzeh. If the Kiddushin doesn't work sequentially, afilu b'vasachas, it shouldn't work if you try to do it at the same time. Hilkach kevan devachos isha lo tafsi Kiddushin, since by the sister of a person's wife the Kiddushin does not take effect. Ki kachinu b'vasachas nami lo have a Kiddushin. When they do the Kiddushin at one moment also, it's not going to be a Kiddushin. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph.